On this webcast, we're going to talk about company culture, your company culture. Let's go. Hello, everybody. This is Antoine Dupont with Catapult Marketing, and this is webcast number 30. And today I have, for the second time, which was guest number 1, Mike Ganino. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hey, what's up? I'm excited to be back a second time.
Right. So we'll get you like right now every 30 episode, like it's a repeat, like we bring Mike Ganino back. So that's really cool. Thank you again for coming and doing another webcast with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun, and it was such an honor to be like the first. I don't know that I think you said I was the first one.
You were the first one. You're the one that started this whole thing and gave me the idea to do it. So thank you so much for being you are the catalyst to Antoine Dupont's webcast. There you go.
And I love it. All I did was reach out and ask for help, and then you showed up and created a whole empire. So congratulations.
Well, thank you
on this far.
Well, this is how great ideas start. They start with this kind of like what I'll call it's the word I think I'm looking for is improv. So I'll tell you more about it. Yeah, you've heard that word. So, Mike, there are a couple of people out there that don't know you. So, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Hi, people who don't know me. I'm Mike Ganino, and I work with companies. A lot of times, service-based companies that are delivering, some kind of product or offering to folks who are really looking to get an edge with their company culture. And I'm not talking about like ping pong tables and snacks and stock options, which are the trifecta of so much that we hear. We hear a lot from Silicon Valley, and we think we've all got to have slides and, pools to entertain our staff. And that's not what it's about. I help people really get a radical culture, which is about changing the way that people interact with each other, changing the way they communicate, and learning how to create something better together. And so I do that through workshops, through speaking, through advisory work. And then writing is the new thing. I have a book coming out in April. So that's the new one I'm adding to the list. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Mike Ganino, the author. This is really, really cool. I'm so looking forward. By the way, we're doing another webcast once your book is out. So what's the date for your book?
April 30th. Oh, 30. There's a theme with us.
Ooh, this is a message. And can you tell us what the book title is going to be?
Yeah, so it's that series of books, the 4 Dummies books, the yellow and black ones that have been around forever. It's one of the books in there. They reached out and said, "Hey, we're looking for a book, and you seem like somebody who's talks about this stuff a lot." So it'll be called Company Culture for Dummies.
Very cool.
And it's got 20 plus chapters. You could kind of pick up each chapter and just read something. If you're specifically looking at how to use rewards or recognition to boost your culture, you could dive right into that chapter. If you're looking for tips on inbound recruiting and how to use your culture as a tool to recruit more great people, there's a chapter on that. So we got lots of little things you can dice up and read as you need.
Very cool. And I love the Dummies book. I actually had never bought one for myself, and someone bought it for me. But it was the history of France for dummies. And I loved it. I devoured the book because it puts it in bite size. I mean, especially the history of France is so complex. The same thing with culture. It's just, it's just really complex. And it just takes all the fluff out and it keeps the essential. So it's like, I really found a new love for the Dummy series, and I don't know if I should be proud of this, that I like that, but I do. It works for me. All right, cool. So, Mike, it's they're saying when you're doing a webcast, you should try to create. You shouldn't say the dates and when it is, so people don't feel like, oh, I shouldn't listen to that because it's not relevant. So it is January 2nd of 2018. Let's put it out there. And obviously, we all kick in the new year with new ambitions, new goals, new strategies. Like we're all excited about what's ahead of us. And we're going to be talking about stuff that's evergreen. So whether you're listening to this webcast on January 3rd, or July 1st and everything, this is going to apply because starting to have a great culture, you don't have to start on January 2nd. You can start anytime. July 17 would be perfect to start. But nonetheless, because it's January 2nd, I think it's a great way to start the year with Mike and sharing, how to define and create a great culture with your company. And I read something somewhere that there's no such thing as not having a culture. And I was like, what do you mean by that? It's like, if I didn't define a culture, then there's no culture. And it says, no, there is a culture. It's just imposed on you. And it's the whatever culture. And that's not good. So you do have a culture. The question is, if you didn't create it, then it's kind of like whatever. So what you are for us, business owners, entrepreneurs and whatnot, you can help us giving us a 3-step to kind of like how to think this through. The first one that when we talked before we registered was envision, which is in the 3-step of how you want to think about culture. The first one is envision. So tell me more. What do you mean by envision?
Yeah. So really quick too, I think, you're so right what you just said about how even if you don't about culture, it exists. As soon as you have 2 people in a group together, there's a culture. So a lot of times people will think culture is only for big companies. I'm not, Hilton or Google. And so I don't need to think about culture. But if you've got 4 or 5 employees, you need to start thinking about it or being intentional about it because it is affecting the way you all work together. So I think that's really wherever you read that person was right, that even if you don't think about it, it exists. And so you might as well put some thought into it. And so the easiest way to do that is to envision what it looks like if everything's going well. And when we talk about culture, we're really talking about the way people work together, the way we deal with conflict, the way we solve problems, the way we approach, Tuesday and the way we approach Friday. It's all of those connective tissues. And it largely has to do with how we communicate and the relationship we have with each other and with the work we do. And so the very first step is to envision it, to get a clear idea of if everything was going well, if we were really successful, what does this look like? And you could pick some date in the future. You could say it's a year from now or it's 2 years from now. I think if you're a small business, maybe you don't go as far out. If you're a big business, maybe you can go a little further, but you're typically talking like 5 years or less.
Right.
And you just kind of get specific about what does it look like if this is going well? And my favorite way to do that is actually for people to sit down and write it out as if it's happening. So don't sit down and make a list of goals or a list of, KPIs or OKRs or whatever acronym you use to define success.
Yeah.
But to actually sit down and write it as a narrative. If you and I were doing it for your business, say, we would pick maybe next year. You would say, oh, we're working on some big things this year. And so I really want to define what success looks like in our culture during this year. Great. So we would pick January 2nd of next year. And we would sit down and we would write it out as if we were watching it happen in front of us, like full narrative, full on, like it's January 2nd, 2019, right. And our business is booming. People are doing this and solving this and customers are coming to us for this. Really, really describing it as it's happening. And what's great about that is you could do it on a big scale or a small scale. So let's say that you're watching this and you're like, I just run a department inside of a bigger organization. And so I'm not in charge of that. Well, yeah, you are. You can sit down and write a vision for your team. You could say, this is how the marketing department at XYZ company is working a year from now. You don't need permission from the CEO to sit down and say, let me get more intentional with my team. If you're a huge organization like Hilton, or you're a small business, a small bed and breakfast, or a small design agency with 5 employees, you can sit down and say, if this all goes well, this is what it looks like. This is how we're working. And so the first step of being able to go anywhere is to envision what it looks like if it's going well. And this will help you not only to be clear about where you're headed, but it'll help you hire people because you'll be able to say, hey, this is where we're going. How's that sit with you? Is this where you want to go? And why do you want to go there? And what's important to you?
This is how we do that. This is how we do the hiring here. We actually, the first step, and we've done group hire, is we actually describe who we are.
Yeah.
And then we say, okay, this is who we are, this is who I am as the leader, I'm like this and I'm like that, and I have all my thing, but this is who I am, this is who we are as a company, and now we're going to take a break, and if this fits with what you were thinking of, we're going to have a cup of coffee, and you want to leave and you say it's not a good fit, then you leave. So people deselect themselves inside the culture. So we actually put the culture first. So this is who we are. So if this is not what you want, it's just, it's not going to work. So this is great. Do you have a couple of examples you could give of culture that people may pick, like we're this or we're that?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is it always ends up being a reflection of you, whether it's you as the business owner in a small business or you as a huge organization. It always ends up kind of closely matching that. I think sometimes people think, I'm going to sit down and write my culture and it's like totally different. And it's like, no, it's not really. It's mostly you at your best. And so what I would say is that there's a lot of options. Sometimes people come to me and they think, I need to have a really playful and youthful culture, but I'm a very conservative and traditional company. I'm in finance or banking. And it's like, yeah, we don't want you to be creative if you're in finance. That gets us in trouble. And what I say is your culture should be a reflection of the way your team is at their best, not a reflection of someone else's team. So like in your case, if you came and said, hey, I've got this agency and we're growing and we're adding more people and I want to make sure we do it really clearly. And I know that the people we want to hire, they want to work at a fun, youthful place. But then I came to work with you and it's like, actually, that's not who you are. That's not who the company is. I would say, let's not do that, because what's going to happen is and this happens a lot, it becomes marketing words on a website and it doesn't become the reality.
Right.
So somebody will sit down and write the culture they want, but it's nowhere near the culture they're committed to. It's the culture they're interested in, but it's not the one they're committed to creating. And so what I find is that it often is closer to you than you think it is. It's closer to now than you think it is. And the reason why you're not achieving what you think you could have is some little small thing in the business. And we can usually fix that. A lot of times when somebody comes to me and they say, oh, we've got a culture issue, I say, well, tell me about the business issues that are happening because of that. Right. Because I think that's the take you've always going to say is, well, what's happening? Well, these departments aren't talking, and so we're not developing new products. Perfect. Let's go solve that problem. And as we solve that problem, guess what else is going to get fixed? Your culture. What I would say is, it's kind of like, maybe it's a branding exercise a little bit, and you could kind of sit down and say, if our culture was a car, what car would it be? Would we be a Mini Cooper where we're like performance heavy, but we're still kind of fun? Or would we be a Volkswagen Beetle convertible, which is all fun and not as much performance? Or would we be an SUV? Would we be a Lincoln Town Car, which is classic? And all of those are good cars, depending on what you want. And the same thing is true for your culture. All cultures can be a good culture, depending on what outcome you want.
Yeah, and so the culture of my company is it's fun, it's strategic, and it's competitive. Like, we're competitors, right? So because it's driven by me, it's definitely not conservative at all. I'm very irreverent. I have a potty mouth. And it's just, this is how it is. And I'll say that because it's like, if that doesn't work for you, if you're looking for a conservative environment, in our agencies, for example, I think it would be a great example for people. There are agencies that are very creative. Very creative. They're all about the form and the colors and the thing. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not who we are. Like, there's a matter of fact, we couldn't care less. We couldn't. Yeah. And if you come to us and you want, pretty colors, well, that's not who we are. We're competitive. We want to look at your competition and says, how are we going to, make them regret you ever hired us? That's what drives us. And we want to strategize and just really uncover who you are and put it out there and compete. So that's our culture. And
imagine that you hired someone and they were the person who was like, oh yeah, I saw this beautiful website that they have, and I see this, and I see the leader, and oh yeah, this is the place for me, because they mistook the message that you had as being like, we're super, super colors and websites, and we're going to design you a pretty website. And my take on what you guys do is to say, we may do that for you if it's the thing that's going to drive more business for you in your marketing. But what if that wasn't super clear during your hiring, on your website, in your employer branding, in the videos you're putting out there, in the articles you're putting out there, and then you hired 2 or 3 people who came to you because they really love building beautiful websites? Imagine how frustrated you're going to be and they're going to be, because neither one of you, the expectation wasn't met. 2 big examples would be like if you went to work at Apple versus if you went to work at Google. Both places could have a good culture, but they're very different. Apple is is the place you're going to go and you're going to iterate something until it's perfect, and then you're going to put it out, and you're going to be secretive, and you're going to hold, you're really going to do that. At Google, it's very loose and open, and they're trying to organize the world's information, so there's a lot of room to move and figure out how to do that. 2 very different cultures, both very good. But if you end up in the wrong one, you're going to be unhappy.
Yeah, we could say Southwest and Delta. It's 2 airplanes doing the exact same purpose. They're taking you from point A to point B. Completely different experience. Delta is conservative. It's traditional. This is how we've been doing it since King Tut was in power. And Southwest were irreverent and fun. And you pick your own seat.
Imagine that you, imagine that you hired, and so we understand that as a consumer. When we get on the plane, we know what we're going to get. We're going to get, some peanuts and a soda and a fun flight attendant on Southwest, and it's going to be different on Delta. Now, imagine you're an employee, and all you heard was like, do you want to be a flight attendant? Here's the job description. The job description is almost the same, by the way.
Right.
So imagine that you were a Delta flight attendant, you were classic, a conservative, and you liked the perfect little outfit and everything. And then you ended up on a Southwest flight as the flight attendant. You would be you wouldn't fit, you would be unhappy. And it doesn't mean anything's wrong with you, and it doesn't mean anything's wrong with the company. It means that nobody sat down to envision what the culture looks like, and then to make sure they were attracting the right people to it.
Yeah, so this is great. So we've got envision. So I'd love to hear comments, suggestions, or questions for Mike about what types of cultures do you love out there that you've seen in either in a restaurant or in an airline or a company? It could be a small company. Sometimes a dry cleaner can have an amazing culture. I mean, no kidding. Or I have an awful one. So put your comments right below, because I'd love to get your ideas and what you've done, because I'm always looking for good ideas. All right. So point number 1 was envision. Point number 2 was enable. So what do you mean by enable? Would you enabling me? I don't think you want to enable me for anything, but I'm all ears.
Yeah. So the no matter what kind of culture you want to create, once you've kind of sat down and really, really clearly defined what it looks like when it's going well, you need to take a step back and say, okay, if that's what we're headed towards, then what kinds of things do we need to have in place so that people can easily go and do that? And so this is where, I use improvisation, the theater world, so much in my work that sometimes people are surprised when I come in and I talk about systems and structure, because it's like, wait a second, isn't improv about winging it and making it up? And it is partially, but the reason that we can do that as improvisers, the reason we can get on stage and make up a scene with no tools, no props, and no planning, is because we follow a structure and a system, so we know what to rely on each other for. And we need to do the same thing in our businesses to get a radical culture. Otherwise, you end up with a chaotic culture where people say, I saw the thing that you envisioned. You envisioned us in a certain way, but then you didn't give me the tools or systems I need to do it. It's kind of like thinking of, if you think of football as an example, we might envision that we're going to play a certain way. Each team kind of plays a little differently, which is why the people on TV can go, the hosts and the sportcasters can go on and talk about them, is because they know what to, I know the Bears are going to play a certain way. I know the 49ers play a certain way. There's a culture on the team that's been envisioned. Well, then somebody has to sit down and write the playbook. They need to go through the plays. That team needs to practice the plays so that on game day, they can have all that in their head and then they can improvise. The same thing in your business. You need to enable your team by thinking through a few of the plays that they need to be ready for. So if you're in a service industry, then you need to think through, what does it look like when something difficult happens? How do we handle that? What's our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recipe, if you will, for solving something like that. If you are a group that does a lot of, let's stay with the airline example. So Southwest has enabled the culture of kind of freedom and fun and that personality by enabling
what I call is open mic stewarding, right?
Yeah, I love it. That's where I should have worked. I was a flight attendant once upon a time. I should have worked at Southwest. I could have been doing shows on the airline, but they've enabled the team because they've said, oh, we want this kind of culture. And here are some ways in which you can be free to do that. We'd love for you to show more personality. We're going to give you 5 or 6 different outfits you can wear, and some of those are shorts. It's one of the only airlines that has people wearing shorts and a polo t-shirt because it matches that casual fun environment that they've envisioned in step 1. And now they're enabling their team by giving them the tools and the systems to be able to repeat that.
And there are rules, because there's probably you're saying, okay, you can do that, but here is the thing where you cannot say this, you cannot do that. Like there's got to be a cap. You can play, but I can imagine like the thing that's come to mind is language. You know, certain types of language being fully self-expressed does not mean you can take the microphone and curse. Even though you know, I mean, for me, I may interpret that as, you know, yeah, I can let it rip, where it would be a complete no. So you can be fully self-expressed, and yet you cannot use that type of language because this is not consistent with either our values or what our clients would expect from us. Because, you know, so for example, I use language, but I rarely do with my clients. You know, I have to know you for a long time for me to, you know, just drop a S-bomb or an F-bomb, because it's just like, you know, but I don't in the sales process, you know, I mean, it's just, and you know, we would not do that.
Yeah. And the reason that companies can do that is because they've envisioned what it looks like in the first place. You know, if you went to Disney, if you went to one of the Disney theme parks, they've envisioned what the experience is like. They've been very clear about what having, you know, the most magical place on earth or whatever their tagline is. And they've been very clear in their culture about, we are about creating experiences for people that are X, Y, and Z, and it feels like this when they're in our park. So then they enable the staff. And so we all play roles. I mean, every time that we open our mouths to communicate, we're deciding on a role. We're always performing, if you will. And that doesn't mean it's inauthentic any more than if I'm talking to my 7-year-old niece or nephew. It's not inauthentic because I changed the way I talk to them versus when I'm talking to their mom, who is my sister. I speak to those two groups differently, and just because I choose a different way to perform doesn't mean I'm being inauthentic. And so the enable step is about taking the culture you've envisioned and saying, if that's what we're headed for, then what are some of the plays, some of the tools, some of the recipes that we need to follow, and let's teach those to our people so they can more easily access them to deliver on that. Just like when you check into a hotel, you know, if you're checking into the Ritz-Carlton versus the W, that's a very different experience.
Yes.
They're both great, but they both have their place. They've envisioned a certain kind of experience they want, and then they've put the tools in place to say, here's some things we think we can do to help you create that more consistently. That's what enabling is all about.
Yeah, it's very funny because I did check in. There was 2 hotels at a conference a couple of years ago in Chicago, and there was the W and the other one, and I picked a W, and I mean, almost immediately within 15 to 20 minutes, I hated it. I was like, oh, this just was weird. And, you know, and I just got in my hotel and I didn't know where to put my toothbrush. It was just bizarre. And I realized I need something kind of like traditional, and just, I need to know, like in the breakfast, like I just wanted, like, give me a muffin and eggs. And it was just like, and they moo, and I'm like, you know, it's just, but it's interesting how, and for some people that would work. So I'd be interested to hear from you guys, you know, some of the culture, some of the things that you're unable, your team, to do that defines your culture. I would really like to do that. Or if you have any questions with Mike about this is the time to do it. Just put the comments right below. Now, the first point was envision. The second point was enable. And the third point is, you guessed it, improv. Mike, what could you possibly mean by improv? I'm going to let my people improv? open mic at Catapult. So tell me, what do you mean by improv?
Yeah, so it could mean that if that's how it works, but improvising in a cultural sense or in a business sense is about, so let me take a step back and say improv is not about comedy. A lot of times people hear the word improv and they think it's about comedy because it comes from improvisational theater. That's our most common connection. So we think of places like Second City, where I've studied before, Improv Olympic, places like that, or we think of TV shows. And so like Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah.
And what it is about, improv at its core is about being able to use whatever's given to take something in a new direction or to take things where they need to go. So in improv, the big saying, the big word we use is yes and. We always accept what the other person has given us on stage because then we can create something together. And then we say and, yes and. So we accept and then we add to or we build upon. In a culture setting, in a business setting, yes and is about accepting the reality of what's going on and then using the and part of yes and to build a bridge to where you need to go. So in the case of this example that we've been talking about, if you envision a certain kind of culture, you enable the team, and then on Tuesday, something happens that you didn't put a system in place for, you didn't have a rule book for, because you've envisioned and you've created a place where your team can know that they have the tools to still get you where you need to go. They're going to be able to say yes and. Some situation occurs and it's like, well, we don't have a play for that. We don't have an enablement tool. We don't have a recipe that says how to handle X, Y, and Z. If your team knows where you're headed because you've envisioned a certain kind of culture, a certain kind of experience, they can say yes to the current reality, which doesn't match up with whatever you thought would happen. And then they can say, and here's how we can build a bridge to start getting it closer to our ideal culture, because they know what that is. And so one of the places where people struggle with this that I hear all the time is millennials. I hear so many managers and leaders talking. By the way, millennials are the oldest millennials are 40. I'm almost 40 and I'm a millennial. So sometimes we think of we're thinking of like high schoolers and it's like, no, those are not millennials anymore. Millennials are like 40-year-olds. Like I'm not a kid. And so we hear these.
You know what's funny about this? So you're the oldest millennial. I'm the youngest baby boomer.
There we go.
I'm a baby boomer, but I'm the last one, the last batch. And so I'm like technically a baby boomer, but I'm like, I don't relate to baby boomers at all.
Yeah.
I think I'm in the between thing, but I'm at the tail end of it. So you're a millennium. That's so how do you, what's the process with the millennial? Like, I know it's a big challenge for businesses, like, trying to figure them out.
So I think the thing is it's less about, here's what I notice. A lot of like old school leaders will say, millennials, kids these days, that kind of stuff. And the reality is every older person has always said that about younger person when they meet at work. I think that's been going on since like the Roman Empire. People have been doing that little thing
forever. The new generation sucks, and we were the best generation.
Right. And we had to work harder. They didn't have to do this. And
I had to go to school, play hail both ways, snow knee deep. Yeah. It's hard.
So the big difference is that this is the first generation to come alive with social media and like the 24-hour news cycle. So everyone is constantly talking about millennials, and we're all just reading the clickbait titles and then we're buying into it. And we shouldn't do that. But one of the things I see over and over is I see old school leaders complaining about millennials at work and doing this. And I'll come back to them 6 months later or a year later, and guess what they're still complaining about? Millennials at work. My thing there is, it's not changing. This is who's here. So you have to accept that as the reality. You have to say yes to that. And then you need to say and to build a bridge to where you need to go. So if you're talking about how this generation is so enabled, like this or entitled, that's what we hear a lot. And millennials are so entitled. Okay, well, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But what is actually going on in your business that makes you say that? How can you accept that that's the reality, and then how can you build to it? So entitlement, by the way, in the millennial world, what I often find is that is because millennials want a sense of progress and they want to know what's next.
Mm-hmm.
That comes because we're a generation of people who grew up on video games
Mm-hmm.
that were very clear about there's 9 levels. You get 17 coins per level, and you can get extra coins if you find the princess. So it was like, great, I understand where I need to go. So it's not that millennials are saying I need to be promoted to the vice president role next year. But what they are saying is, you as a manager owe it to me to help me understand how this is progressing my career, what the next level is, how I can collect coins and save the princess.
Right.
That's not that hard to do
No.
if you're a great manager. It's not that hard to sit down and say, let me map this out with you. Let's talk about the skills we need to develop. Let's talk about how I'm going to know if you did it. It's that the old school leadership stuff of like, I'll come and anoint you good when I'm ready, that doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can either complain about millennials and keep doing it year after year, or we can say, this is the reality, let me accept it, and then let me build a bridge. And that's one of the things I do a lot to help cultures is, let's just accept the reality of what's going on, improvise, and then let's use that to get where we want to go, which is what we clarified in the envision step.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I was just thinking of culture. The baby boomers were completely entitled with the greatest generation. You know, these guys wanted, like, drugs and free sex and all this thing, coming from it's just the same thing. It just repeats itself. And the millennials will be complaining about the next generation. So I'd be interested to hear from you guys. And I think it's really important how you are, great ideas of what you've implemented with millennials in your workforce that are working in your restaurant, in your hotel, in your small business, in your manufacturing plant, whatever it is. I'd love to hear things that you've implemented, because it's not easy to work from one generation to the next, because there's things like you just don't get it. Why are they like this? Well, they're like this because they're like that, and that's just how it is. Funny enough, I spent actually last night half an hour with my son. He absolutely wants me to play video games with him, and I'm like, I mean, just to date me. My video game when I was a kid was Pong. Okay, it's seriously. So I'm like the generation right before it came out, because when I came out, we had video games, but that when all that stuff came out, I was already off in the lot.
Yeah.
So listen, this was really cool, Mike. Number 1, envision. Number 2, enable. Number 3, improv, to get your culture set right for 2018 and beyond. Because it doesn't matter whether you start now or whether you start, if you're watching this, whenever you're watching this, when you're ready, and if you're, this was optimized around culture. So if you found this, it's going to give you possibly some great ideas. So this was really cool. Mike, I know that if I'm watching this and I am a business owner, or I have a company, and I'm like thinking, you know what, Mike is making a lot of sense. How do people get in touch with you? How do they hire you to come and speak at their conference or come and do a workshop? What's the deal?
Yeah, so it's super easy. You could just find me. My website is mikeganino.com. If you're watching this video somewhere above or below or on the sides,
Spell
my
it out.
name is spelled out, but last name is Ganino. Ganino. Super easy. I think if you Google Mike Ganino, I'm probably the one that shows up. There's others, including my dad, but there's a few others, but I think I'm the one that shows up. So you can find me mikeganino.com. You can find me Mike Ganino on Instagram, on Facebook, whatever it is. You could slide into my DMs and say, hey, I need some culture help or a tip or something like that. I love to share my favorite articles and things with people. So if you're out there and you say, I'm not ready to bring someone in yet, I just need an idea, then I'll send you a podcast or a webcast or something I've been on where I talk about your specific business issue. And this new thing I'm doing in 2018 is this culture roadmap. And so what this is like a little slice. And I've designed this this process where we kind of go through and say, what are all the things you need to have in line in your culture? So we go through envision, enable, and improvise, and we assess your business from like 37 different angles. And so that's an easy way that some people reach out to me, is to say, and I've done this a little bit in 2017. People loved it. So I'm like building it up a lot in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, we're going to work together to go through this checklist. I'll give it to you and you can either go do some of the work, or you could say, okay, this was a lot of stuff I want to work on. Then you could say, okay, how do we do more with Mike? Is it a workshop? Is it a speech? Is it some advisory work? But there's an easy little way to build a roadmap. So that's a fun new thing that I think is an easy way for people to start a conversation.
This is really, really cool. So you got it, right? MikeGanino.com. This is where you can find, and I'm going to put the links below if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube. If you're listening to a podcast, go to MikeGanino.com and you'll get it, but I'll put all the links so you can get in touch with Mike. And on that note, Mike, thank you so much. I am so looking forward to 2018. I'm so looking forward to seeing you soon at Heroic Public Speaking with one of your world famous improv class. By the way, I'm not only a what is this? I'm not only a user, but I'm also a client or something. I've seen Mike in action. What I'm trying to say is I've seen him in action, and you are really, really cool. A great teacher. A lot of fun. So that's really exciting. And on that note, thank you so much, Mike, and thank you.
Thanks.